Counselor Seraphis stood at the center of the great convocation chamber, her emerald-green skin reflecting the iridescent light that shimmered off the council's crystalline dome. She could feel her hearts, for her species possessed too, beating with trepidation beneath her ornate robe of office. Around her stretched the half-moon ring of council seats, each seat occupied by representatives from star systems spanning the breadth of the known galaxy. Their gazes were fixed upon her, anticipating some profound decree, some revelation that would define their next course of action in an age fraught with profound change. This was to be no ordinary gathering. The final word on the matter of human genetic adaptability, a subject that had become a source of great concern, rested on Seraphis's shoulders. Nearly everyone in the galaxy knew that humans, though appearing relatively fragile, possessed an uncanny talent for survival. Their civilization had blossomed outward from Earth, forging alliances, toppling prejudices, and expanding with inexorable determination. But the phenomenon under discussion that day was both wondrous and troubling. Human males, it seemed, could breed with almost any known intelligent species. A hush settled over the chamber, deeper and denser than the vacuum of interstellar space, as Seraphis, her voice steadied by years of political refinement, began to speak. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she said, her tone poised, "we have before us incontrovertible data. Humans, particularly male humans, are displaying a propensity for cross-species reproduction that outstrips any recorded biological norms." Murmurs rustled along the semicircle of delegates. The luminous patterns on the floor pulsed, reflecting the swirling emotions in the room. Seraphis raised her pale, webbed hand, and a holographic interface flickered to life. Charts, graphs, and images of various progeny, some with scales, some with feathers, others with swirling tentacles, hovered in midair, rotating serenely as they showcased the improbable hybrids. No fewer than 100 documented cases had surfaced in the last 5 cycles. The single uniting factor was that each child, in its own manner, possessed strands of human DNA. "The data is unambiguous," continued Seraphis. "This phenomenon has led to cultural upheavals on multiple worlds, incited religious fervor in certain regions, and inspired awe and fear throughout countless star systems." Her voice, measured and calm, belied the turmoil she felt within. This council was formed to preserve harmony among all known species, to safeguard the equilibrium that ensures our continued prosperity. If humanity's genetic adaptability is truly boundless, our known definitions of reproduction, lineage, and indeed the future shape of our galaxy are all at stake. As she finished, the holographic display faded. Seraphis stepped back, allowing an uneasy silence to flood the chamber. Moments later, voices rose in heated debate. Some delegates, particularly those hailing from species with famously rigid reproductive processes, found the revelations nothing short of an existential threat. Others saw in this development the next phase of their evolution. Some, enthralled by the potential of harnessing human genetics, advocated for collaborative study. But the overarching sentiment was plain. There had never been a more pressing matter for the Council to address, and the solutions were far from simple. In the midst of those fervent arguments sat Counselor Merix, an influential figure from the tri-limbed Lavara species, whose planet had recently reported the first human Lavaran offspring in recorded history. The child, rumored to have telepathic abilities beyond either parent species, had ignited fervor among Merix's people. Merix's usual stoic composure wavered as she demanded swift regulation. "Humans must be contained," she declared, her triple eyes narrowing. "We cannot allow them to breed indiscriminately across the galaxy. They are rewriting evolutionary laws we believed inviolable." Some voices agreed with Merix wholeheartedly. Others, primarily from species that had enjoyed fruitful treaties with humanity, were more ambivalent. Ambassador Kesris from the oceanic world of Abylos insisted that halting human expansion would be tantamount to stifling progress, reminiscent of the dark epochs when science and knowledge were suppressed. For Seraphis, the storm of conflicting opinions was exactly the impasse she had predicted. Her own experiences told her that humankind, while reckless at times, were also fiercely compassionate. Suppressing them outright would be catastrophic, politically and morally. She proposed, as she had in the closed committee sessions, a more measured approach. Let us investigate this phenomenon. Let us study a human male, intimately and scientifically, to understand precisely how their genes are so adaptable. Once we truly know, we can devise a fair and reasoned policy. Her proposition was met with tension, but, finally, with begrudging acceptance. And so it was decided. Seraphis, armed with council authority, would perform a rigorous investigation. The subject she chose to focus on was none other than the decorated soldier, Commander Ryker Voss, a fearless operative noted for bravery in campaigns against pirates on the Rim worlds, but also for his notorious unpredictability and rebellious streak. The fact that he was something of a folk hero to many humans, and that he had a well-known record of fraternizing, some might say carousing, across allied worlds, made him the perfect representative specimen for this unprecedented study. And thus began the odyssey that would change Seraphis's life, and by extension, the future of the galaxy. Ryker Voss stood beside his starship, the Astral Wing, in the cavernous docking bay of the Council's headquarters on Nabora Prime. Muscular, with a tanned complexion earned from countless missions on sun-scorched worlds, he wore the uniform of a commander, its decorations testifying to his valor. A half-smirk played upon his lips as Seraphis approached, her official robes making her stand out among the numerous mechanics and officers bustling about. "You must be Counselor Seraphis," he said, with a mock formality that conveyed more curiosity than deference. "I've heard you're a real stickler for protocol." She inclined her head gracefully, though she could not suppress a small, knowing smile. "Commander Voss, I appreciate your willingness to cooperate. This matter is of grave importance to the Council. We trust your experience shall be invaluable." Ryker let out a low chuckle and extended a hand in greeting. "I never thought I'd see the day the Council singled me out for my experience. Usually, it's the courts-martial that keep tabs on me." His irreverence unsettled her a little, yet she found it oddly refreshing. Seraphis was used to the courtly politeness of ambassadors and dignitaries, but here stood a man who seemed unconcerned with ceremony. She reminded herself, this is a scientific investigation, not a social call. And so, with one practiced, official gesture, she beckoned him to follow, leading him through the labyrinthine corridors that would deposit them in a specially prepared laboratory suite. The suite's interior contrasted sharply with the monolithic architecture of the Council spire. Glass partitions and sleek black panels glistened. Various scanning devices pulsed with readouts, while a few scientists waited, each from a different species, all curious. Seraphis noted the hint of amusement dancing in Ryker's dark eyes as he surveyed the complicated apparatus laid out to study him. The entire affair must have seemed like something out of a storybook, an alien chamber dedicated to unraveling the secrets of humankind's fertility. "Please sit," Seraphis said, her voice gentle but resolute. Ryker took a seat on a reclining examination platform that hovered a few inches above the floor. One by one, scanning devices activated, bathing him in soft luminescence while readouts flickered across overhead screens. Seraphis observed from a short distance, cross-referencing her datapad as the figures materialized in real time. She watched, enraptured, as the scanners displayed the intricate double helix of Ryker's DNA. The pattern glowed in emerald lines on a holographic display. Every scientist in the room marveled at how, within that seemingly standard human genome, hidden complexities spooled in improbable symmetry. Gene clusters within gene clusters, dormant segments that awakened under certain environmental or biological stimuli. She had never seen anything like it in her decades of research. Ryker, unperturbed by the fuss, directed casual jokes at the scientists. "Is it normal for you folks to see a big red warning, overly reproductive sign in my genes?" he quipped, eliciting awkward laughter from a few of the more humor-inclined onlookers. Seraphis found herself suppressing a grin. "Commander, please remain still." She carried herself with impeccable decorum, but there was no denying he had a charm that, while irreverent, could be disarming. Even in this sterile environment, some intangible energy hovered between them. With a mental effort, she refocused on the readouts, reminding herself she was here to gather data that might prevent galactic discord. But the more she studied the sequences, the more she found her initial hypothesis confirmed. There was indeed some force at work in human DNA. something intangible yet persistently evident, that allowed cross-species compatibility. It defied established xenobiology, and it enthralled her. Little did she know, fascination would soon transform into something deeper, something the counselor had never anticipated. Days bled into weeks, and their study followed a grueling schedule. For Ryker, it involved not only physical examinations, but extensive psychological profiling. Each evening, he submitted to interviews detailing his many relationships. At times, the revelations were scandalous, occasionally humorous, and frequently baffling from a strictly biological standpoint. From a single night's encounter in the swirling city lights of Mazzaro to a near marriage to a princess on the aquatic planet of Jejura, Ryker's stories painted a picture of a wanderer who found companionship wherever he traveled. But it wasn't mere promiscuity that intrigued Seraphis. It was that each encounter seemed to be fueled by genuine curiosity, empathy, and a sort of open-hearted passion that defied the customary caution between species. She found herself puzzling over his motivations late at night, alone in the data archives. She would replay the day's holo-recordings, analyzing every nuance of his words, his gestures. Perhaps this was the missing component, an emotional or psychological impetus woven into human genetics, an uncanny readiness to bond. She considered the possibility that the mind and heart, as much as the body, fueled their extraordinary fertility. During that time, she kept the council updated with carefully worded reports. Certain delegates urged immediate clampdowns, quarantines, and forced medical intervention, while others believed more data was necessary. Merrick's demanded action at every turn, reminding them that every day they delayed, more potential cross-species couplings could occur. Tensions simmered in the council corridors, speculation mounting as to whether Seraphis was still a neutral, unbiased observer. She herself began to sense a shift inside her. At first, it was an intellectual admiration for Ryker's openness. Then, it grew into something more personal, less clinical. She caught herself watching him in the quiet moments, when he thought no one was looking, noticing the kindness behind his carefree facade. Sometimes, the two of them would talk about homeworlds, about the differences between her watery birth planet and the mountainous terrain of Earth's continents. Other times, she found him surprisingly silent, as though he carried hidden burdens from the battles he'd seen. Late one evening, after a particularly exhaustive series of tests, Seraphis discovered Ryker alone on a small observation deck that overlooked Nabora Prime's famed ring system. Subtle lights illuminated him as he leaned against the railing, gazing at the swirling cosmic dust. She stepped closer, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then he exhaled, a quiet sigh, before turning to her. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" he said, gesturing toward the shimmering arcs that encircled the planet. Particles glittered like cosmic diamonds in the distant sunlight. "It is," she replied softly. "I sometimes come here when I need to think. The rings, they remind me of the cyclical nature of the galaxy. Perhaps everything moves in patterns, and we just need to find the right lens to see them clearly." He turned, leaning against the railing, arms folded. A curious intensity glimmered in his gaze. "Is that what you're searching for in my DNA? Another pattern to make sense of all this chaos?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose so. Something about your species is unlike anything we've witnessed. We can't fully comprehend how these cross-species conceptions are even possible." Her voice grew softer. "We are taught, from an early age, that every phenomenon has a law, a principle. But this defies so many laws." Ryker gave a small shrug. "Maybe the law is simpler than we think. The heart wants what it wants. Sometimes that's enough." She felt the warmth of his presence, the magnetism that so many had described. Caught between duty and curiosity, she found herself wondering if a single conversation with him could pull her into a gravitational orbit no data set could explain. With a composed exhale, she bid him good night and retired to her quarters, feeling a tumult of new thoughts swirl in her mind. In subsequent weeks, the dynamic between them changed. Their interactions, once purely formal, took on a more intimate tone. Seraphis insisted it was strictly in pursuit of her research, but she wasn't blind to the reality. There was chemistry. She tried to maintain the necessary professional distance, but that line blurred as they discovered a genuine camaraderie. Together, they reviewed the cross-species genetic data, searching for hidden patterns. At times, Riker's anecdotes about his romantic pursuits turned from comical recollections to more introspective musings, painting a portrait of a man seeking genuine connections in a vast, ever-expanding universe. Meanwhile, pressure from the Council mounted. Rumors circulated that a faction was pushing for a resolution to forcibly sterilize humans outside their home territories. Others insisted that was barbaric. Pro-human lobbies, heavily influenced by Earth's ambassadors, demanded an immediate end to what they deemed genetic discrimination. And so, the galaxy teetered on the edge of a new conflict, the tension thick enough to slice with a vibroblade. Caught in the middle, Seraphis wrestled with a new wave of emotions. The more she interacted with Ryker, the more she saw a reflection of the infinite tapestry of life itself, full of wonder, curiosity, and indomitable hope. She questioned her own biases, her own fears. Even if the Council had valid concerns, was suppression truly the answer? Could it be that humanity's adaptability heralded not the destruction of intergalactic identity, but rather a unifying force, bridging gaps once considered impassable? Her internal dilemma came to a head when a confidential report landed on her desk. A directive from certain Council hardliners, urging a final measure. If the data proved humans could indeed reproduce with any species, then humans would be required to undergo mandatory genetic resequencing that would nullify this capacity. In effect, an enforced limitation on the entire species. It was a draconian solution that would surely incite rebellion among humanity. She was still reeling from the implications when her door chimed, and Ryker stepped inside, eyes brimming with urgency. "Counselor," he said, dispensing with pleasantries, "I've received word from a contact in the Council that something extreme is in the works. They're planning to force compliance, or, if that fails, forcibly isolate Earth." He approached her, noticing her shaken expression. "You've heard the same, I take it?" She nodded, her voice tremulous. "I just got the directive. I fear the Council is preparing to move forward unless I can provide them with evidence of some alternative." Ryker clenched his fists. "They can't just shut us down or mess with our genetic code. That's monstrous. What about all the alliances we've forged, the treaties we've fought for? Are we just an inconvenience now?" He paused, reading the turmoil in her eyes. "Seraphis, I know you want to do the right thing. But you see what's happening. Some in the Council don't care about right or wrong, only about preserving the status quo they've always known." She glanced down at the directive. "I need time, Commander. Time to finish our research, to demonstrate that there's no need for such drastic measures. That your species isn't the threat they claim, but they're unwilling to grant more time." Riker's gaze was intense. "Then we give them a reason to wait." His features softened. "Seraphis, we can't let them do this to us, to you, to the galaxy. I'll do whatever I can. I'll stand before the Council, speak on behalf of my people. If you need a demonstration, any test, I'm all yours." A playful grin curved his lips, but his voice trembled slightly, betraying his concern. She felt her heart, both of them, ache. She was a counselor, sworn to neutrality, yet she was caught in a maelstrom of emotion. Before she could answer, a gentle alarm chimed, indicating the start of yet another round of genetic analysis. The moment broke, and the tension lingered as they proceeded to the lab, both uncertain of what lay ahead. The pivotal day dawned in a rush of sterile lights and hushed corridors. Seraphis and her team readied themselves for the final battery of tests on Ryker. Much of the staff had grown fond of him. He had a way of making even the most exacting procedure into a spectacle. Still, the mood was sober, overshadowed by the looming threat of draconian Council action. If these final results couldn't sway the delegates, the Council might enact the dreaded resolution. The scanning apparatus whirred to life, calibrating to a higher sensitivity. Seraphis donned specialized gloves, their tips glowing, designed to interface with the deeper layers of scanned tissue in real time. As she maneuvered them over Riker's form, the lab's holographic displays began painting a living tapestry of his genetic code, more nuanced than ever. Threads of proteins seemed to shift and realign, forging new linkages under the scanning beam. It was almost as though the very act of observation revealed a living, dynamic code, adapting on the fly. Suddenly, an anomaly spiked on the readouts. Seraphis narrowed her gaze. "Impossible," she breathed. The scanners indicated an active reconfiguration in his cells, something akin to an epigenetic shift. Her team froze, exchanging glances. Ryker, who had been relaxing, felt the hush and tensed. Is there a problem? Seraphis double-checked the readouts, her voice quavering. Commander, have you been experiencing any fatigue or unusual sensations in the last few days? He shrugged. Maybe a little headache here and there. Some shortness of breath, but I thought that was just the usual after the battery of tests. Then a flicker of worry crossed his eyes. Why? Her mind raced. According to the data, something was happening within his biology, as if new proteins were forming a chain reaction in response to a biological cue. But a cue from where? One possibility surfaced. If, somewhere along the line, he had contracted a pathogen that triggered a hidden gene sequence, this might be the cause. But that's not what it looked like. This was different, some deeper mechanism that spontaneously awakened. She struggled to remain calm, ignoring the growing knot in her stomach. Let's run a deeper scan. Perhaps it's a false alarm. But in her mind, she knew it was genuine, and it was big. She prayed it would not serve as the final argument for the Council's more extreme members. In the next hour, the data became clear. Ryker's body was in the midst of a biological event, one that resembled the early stages of a systemic metamorphosis. The triggers were unknown. Could it be environmental? Emotional? The lab had never recorded anything of the sort in a human subject. The process was reminiscent of metamorphic species that entered chrysalis-like states. Her heart pounded as she turned to her assistants. We need to quarantine him immediately and inform the Council. Ryker, hearing the word quarantine, bristled. Wait a minute, Seraphis, he began, stepping off the examination platform. I'm fine. I feel fine. But a wave of dizziness struck him mid-sentence, forcing him to steady himself against the wall. All right, he muttered, maybe not that fine. In short order, the medics whisked him to a containment suite, a sterile bubble of advanced life support systems. Word spread throughout the facility that something monumental was happening to the human test subject. Hushed speculation filled corridors and break rooms. Was this final proof of humans' morphological capabilities? Had the commander's body, subjected to incessant scrutiny, found a new way to adapt? Seraphis was at his side through it all, scanning, observing. Worried, fascinated, terrified of the Council's reaction. And in a moment of mutual vulnerability, amidst the beep of monitors and the hushed swirl of staff, Ryker clutched her hand, their gazes locking. No matter what happens, remember, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help your cause, to protect my people. Galactic Council crisis meetings ensued. Merrick's proclaimed these developments a sign of impending doom. Others, more moderate, demanded clarity. Seraphis, meanwhile, struggled to keep the official channels informed while balancing her responsibilities to Ryker as a patient. She fought tooth and nail to ensure that no one, not even the Council, tried to forcibly experiment on him while he was vulnerable. Amid this swirling tension, Seraphis noticed subtle changes in Ryker's physiology, heightened senses, rapid tissue regeneration, and even an anomaly in the composition of his blood. The deeper she looked, the more she saw that his cells, like a cosmic riddle, were rewriting themselves in response to unknown stimuli. Then one night, Seraphis had a dream, an intense, vivid dream in which she stood on a luminous beach of glassy sand beneath alien constellations. Beside her stood Ryker, and between them, a small child with skin the color of starlight. The child looked at Seraphis and spoke a single phrase in a language she did not recognize, yet in the dream, she understood perfectly. The future belongs to those unafraid of transformation. She awoke in a cold sweat, her heart's pounding. Though her rational mind fought to dismiss it as a mere dream, she felt an undercurrent of inevitability. The dream had felt more like a prophecy. With trembling hands, she tapped into the medical database to review the latest findings, searching for an explanation for Ryker's metamorphosis. Instead, she found herself recalling the dream's child and the ephemeral sense of wonder it instilled. Perhaps, she realized, this was the universe's way of guiding her toward an answer no spreadsheet or biological readout could provide. That morning, after barely resting, she visited Ryker in the containment suite, half expecting to see further dramatic changes. Instead, she found him stable, leaning against the transparent barrier, scrutinizing star charts on a floating hologram. He gave her a lopsided grin as she approached. Seraphis, he said, his voice tinged with relief. They're letting me move around a bit more. The doc says I'm in some kind of stasis, that it might pass or might accelerate. He chuckled, though she sensed his underlying fear. Never thought I'd be the star attraction in the Council's biggest show. She gave him a wistful smile, stepping through the sanitized field that allowed her entry. I'm just grateful you're stable. She took a measured breath. Ryker, I need to tell you something. The weight of the night's dream pressed on her. All of this, these events, I can't help but feel we're on the edge of something monumental. Not just for you, not just for humanity, but for every species in the galaxy. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I think the Council is right to be concerned, because what you're undergoing might be a microcosm of what awaits us all, a transformation we've never anticipated. His gaze held hers. I don't understand it, Seraphis, but I trust you. The earnestness in his voice was unmistakable. And then, in a moment that defied logic and protocol, Seraphis felt tears well in her eyes. Despite her carefully maintained composure, she found herself overwhelmed. She'd spent her entire life as an arbiter of reason, a champion of logic, yet here she stood, trembling like a novice, the heart of her professional world turned upside down. But Ryker was not finished. He softly pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture reminiscent of many an alien greeting, and whispered, "You're not alone in feeling this." His voice faltered. The next words might have come from a place he had long buried. There's a reason I was open to any species, any chance for connection. I never wanted to be alone. Across 1,000 worlds, I looked for something. For acceptance, for genuine understanding. And in you, I found more of that than I ever thought possible. The moment felt both infinite and fleeting. They stood in silence, parted only by the fragile boundaries of their roles, counselor and subject, official and soldier, alien and human, yet something deeper bound them. Seraphis, knowing the ramifications but unable to deny the truth, leaned in, pressing her lips lightly to his. It was a gesture that defied the protocols of the great convocation chamber, a quiet rebellion against the labyrinthine politics that had brought them here. She felt, in that delicate moment, the faint stirrings of possibility, of unity that transcended the divisions the galaxy had so painstakingly built. In the weeks that followed, Ryker's condition seemed to stabilize. The metamorphic changes within him did not escalate as feared, nor did they recede entirely. Rather, they lingered in a suspended equilibrium, as though his body had prepared itself for some future chapter. Seraphis and her team documented every detail, attempting to decode the precise triggers. Some hypothesized that exposure to so many alien environments had awakened a dormant evolutionary mechanism in humankind. Others hinted that it might be a random mutation specific to Ryker. Nonetheless, the moment of existential panic subsided, replaced by cautious optimism. News of his partial recovery prompted a flurry of messages from the Council. Merrick's demanded urgent measures, accusing Seraphis of partiality. A small but growing pro-human faction insisted that Ryker's experience underscored humanity's value as a cornerstone of future intergalactic cooperation. Stuck in the center, Seraphis called for a special session of the Council. Her plan: present the findings comprehensively and argue for an open-minded approach to human genetic adaptability, rather than punitive control. Unbeknownst to the public, however, another upheaval stirred beneath the surface. Seraphis felt changes within her own body, subtle and delicate at first, strange pangs in her abdomen, fleeting spells of dizziness. She attributed them to exhaustion. But as the days crept by, the signs intensified. Medical scans confirmed a shocking truth. She was pregnant. The father, Commander Ryker Voss. The discovery left her reeling. And not only her. When Ryker learned the news, he displayed a mixture of stunned delight and dawning fear. They both recognized the magnitude of what this meant. For Seraphis's species, such a conception was nearly unheard of with any outside race, let alone a human. But in her case, there was the added complexity of her station and the political powder keg swirling around them. She imagined the Council's reaction. Some would view this as the ultimate betrayal of neutrality, an unforgivable lapse in judgment. Others might see it as proof positive that humans were unstoppable in their infiltration of other gene pools. Yet she also knew that many might witness a miracle, a living testament to a future of shared evolution. As the pregnancy advanced, the hybrid child grew at an astonishing rate. Medical readouts suggested a synergy of genetic material, evidence of a direct link between the phenomenon under scrutiny and the child forming in Seraphis's womb. Panic seized her at times. What if the child was labeled an abomination? Or worse, what if the Council demanded an immediate termination to preserve what they viewed as the purity of intergalactic species? The possibility loomed in her nightmares. Her choices were stark: conceal the pregnancy, or reveal it and risk immediate repercussions. But Seraphis had vowed to protect truth and knowledge, to serve the galaxy honestly. So she made her decision. She would tell the council. Come what may, she would not hide her child's existence, nor the love that had led to this improbable union. Steadied by Ryker's unwavering support, she marched into the great convocation chamber one fateful day, requesting the podium. Scores of delegates from 1,000 star systems looked on. Their interest peaked when the usually composed Counselor Seraphis appeared visibly nervous. When she spoke, her voice echoed with quiet resolve. She laid out the findings of her research, systematically dispelling myths about humanity's cross-species reproduction. She explained how it was not a mere violation of natural law, but perhaps a new expression of it, a potential stepping stone toward bridging ancient divisions. She urged them not to act out of fear. But the greatest shock came when she stepped forward, placed a gentle hand upon her abdomen, and declared, I stand before you as living proof of this phenomenon. I carry within me a hybrid child, conceived with a human male. And I am not ashamed, nor frightened, but hopeful. An uproar rippled through the chamber. For a long moment, there was only a clamor of voices. Some delegates stood, outraged, while others gaped in astonishment. A fraction, seeing her calm dignity, appeared moved. The swirling holographic pillars flickered with the roiling energies of debate. Seraphis held her ground, hearts hammering, waiting for an official reaction. Counselor Merrick's was the first to break the stunned hush with a cry of indignation. This is exactly the chaos we feared. Our revered counselor has been compromised. She gestured dramatically. We must place her under arrest and isolate the child as evidence. But opposition to Merrick's thunderous declaration emerged swiftly. Ambassador Kesris rose from her seat, watery voice resonating. And what sort of message would that send, to punish someone for forging a new path in life's grand tapestry? Are we so blinded by fear that we would condemn an innocent child before it even draws breath? The chamber erupted again with shouts, arguments, and calls for order. Seraphis stood, trembling, uncertain whether she was witnessing the dawn of a revolution or the collapse of the council. Then, with the regal composure that had defined her career, she lifted both arms, calling for silence. If you persecute me, she spoke, know that you also reveal your commitment to fear over unity. Are we not the great convocation, formed so that all species might thrive in shared knowledge and respect? My child is not a threat. My child could be a bridge, if you but let it. It was at that moment that Commander Ryker Voss, who had been listening from the gallery's edge in full uniform, stepped onto the main floor. He bowed respectfully to the assembly. I stand by her, he said, voice strong. And if this council will not allow a peaceful path, you must be prepared for the consequences. Humans will not idly accept the persecution of one of our own, or the condemnation of our unborn child. The tension reached a breaking point, culminating in a spectacle of political upheaval. Over the next several hours, the session splintered into multiple debates, emergency votes, and hasty adjournments. Yet, ultimately, in the face of Seraphis's raw bravery, a significant block of delegates saw reason. They recognized not only the injustice of punishing the counselor and her unborn child, but also the potential for forging a new epoch of genetic collaboration. A slender majority prevailed. No forced sterilization, no mandatory genetic resequencing, no imprisonment for Seraphis or Ryker. Instead, the council ruled that further study was warranted, but on voluntary terms that respected the individuals involved. A chance, albeit fragile, at forging a more enlightened perspective. In the weeks that followed, life for Seraphis and Ryker took on a surreal quality. Overnight, they found themselves the public face of an unprecedented phenomenon. Media channels across the galaxy clamored for statements. Some portrayed them as heralds of a new future. Others demonized them as conspirators in a forced homogenization of the galaxy's gene pool. The council itself remained in a precarious balance, with pro-integration and isolationist factions clashing at every turn. Still, hope endured. Scientists from dozens of species volunteered to form a cooperative body, working alongside Seraphis to better understand cross-species compatibility. Aid poured in from unexpected quarters. Traditional adversaries set aside rivalries, drawn by the promise of unraveling a mystery that transcended their petty disputes. Under carefully crafted security protocols, Seraphis's pregnancy advanced with thorough medical supervision. Though the child's development was unusual by the standards of both species, doctors discovered no sign of inherent danger. Only new, miraculous forms of synergy between her genetic makeup and Ryker's. Not all was smooth, of course. At times, fringe groups attempted sabotage. They claimed the child was an affront to nature or that Seraphis and Ryker were pawns in a cosmic game controlled by hidden powers. But these extremist acts, ironically, only galvanized moderate forces to protect the unborn child, forging an unwritten sense of kinship among many who once stood apart. There was, for Seraphis, a period of deep introspection. She had dedicated her life to the protocols and principles of the Council, determined to safeguard the galaxy from threats within and without. Now, she was forced to redefine what threat truly meant, and realized how quickly fear could eclipse reason. Yet she also saw how a spark of empathy could unite disparate souls. Every morning, feeling the gentle stirrings of the life growing within her, she found renewed determination, fueled by love for Ryker and hope for a tomorrow that welcomed possibility instead of dreading it. As the final days of her pregnancy approached, rumors circled that a minority faction was plotting to forcibly remove the hybrid child for further study. But under the new coalition of protective allies, those conspirators found themselves outmaneuvered. Plans were foiled, culminating in a final confrontation on a remote asteroid station, where the conspirators tried to enact a kidnapping. Ryker and a loyal squad of troopers thwarted their attempt, ensuring Seraphis's safety. Word spread of Ryker's daring rescue mission, and in a single stroke, the narrative shifted throughout the galaxy. More and more, the child was seen not as a threat, but as a precious catalyst for unity. Finally, the day arrived. In the pristine medical wing of Nabora Prime's research facility, Seraphis gave birth to the galaxy's first documented human-Quinn hybrid. A hush fell over the watchers as the infant emerged, tiny, perfect, eyes flickering with the color of starlight. Seraphis, exhausted but radiant with maternal glow, cradled the child. Ryker stood at her side, tears openly trailing down his cheeks, unashamed of the raw emotion that overcame him. Nurses and doctors, some with tentacles, others with shimmering scales or multiple limbs, gathered around in astonishment. The child was physically similar to a human infant, but subtle traits, like the faint iridescence of her skin, an echo of Seraphis's emerald hue, marked her as something entirely new. Her genetic scans would later confirm what many suspected. Her DNA was stable, healthy, and perhaps even more resilient than either parent's. In those first precious moments, a hush of reverence settled in the ward. Seraphis felt the enormity of it all, tears slipping freely from her luminous eyes. She saw, in the child's gaze, the reflection of her dream, of that starlit beach and the whispered promise of unity. Perhaps this was how it would begin, not with the flourish of legislation or grand treaties, but with a single child, loved and protected, defying the boundaries that once seemed unassailable. The months after the birth brought a cautious yet growing acceptance. The Council, finally forced to reconcile with the living evidence of hybridization, softened its stance. Merix, faced with overwhelming support for the child's well-being, recanted her most vehement positions. Though she remained wary of humanity's genetic adaptability, she bowed to the new reality, acknowledging that fear could no longer be the guiding policy. In fact, a wave of renewed exploration and cooperation surged through the galaxy. Delegates urged the study of reciprocal adaptations, seeing in the child a bridge to deeper biological understanding. The entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath as one star system after another embraced an era of possibility. Wars that had simmered for decades began to wane, overshadowed by a sense of cosmic wonder. Humanity, once cast in the role of unstoppable breeders, found itself lauded for its boundless potential to forge connections. Earth's ambassadors embraced the new era, extending olive branches to old rivals. Meanwhile, the Quinn, Seraphis's home species, experienced a cultural renaissance as well, proud that their counselor had played a pivotal role in shaping a more harmonious galactic order. For Seraphis and Ryker, life became a combination of public duty and private joy. They raised their daughter, whom they named Alicia. In the heart of Nabora Prime, juggling press conferences, diplomatic gatherings, and child-rearing with equal fervor. Alicia grew quickly, demonstrating small but wondrous gifts, a slightly accelerated healing factor from her father's side, a quiet telepathic empathy reminiscent of her mother's lineage. More than once, her gentle cooing could soothe heated arguments in the council hall, as if her very presence reminded everyone of the fragile miracle they all protected. As Alicia passed her first year, the council's tone shifted in a lasting, constructive direction. They adopted new guidelines, a future of unity charter that recognized hybrid offspring as legitimate citizens of multiple star systems, entitled to protections from discrimination. Funding soared for cross-species genetic research, but with ethical oversight that ensured no forced experimentation. This balanced approach was a testament to how fear could be conquered by compassion, reason, and personal courage. In one of the final acts of the transitional era, Seraphis was elected to a newly formed position, the ambassador of intergalactic harmony, with Ryker at her side as a special envoy. Together, they toured star systems, meeting delegations, forging new alliances. While skepticism persisted in corners of the galaxy, and some still whispered dire warnings, there was a prevailing sense that a threshold had been crossed. An optimism blossomed, a belief that destiny lay not in rigid walls, but in open channels of communion. And so, it came to pass that what began in the Great Convocation Chamber as a warning, human males will breed with anything. We have to stop them. Concluded, in fact, with a different refrain. Humans have a part to play in uniting us all, if we only learn to adapt together. In the twilight glow of Nabora Prime, beneath the shimmering dome that once rang with the voice of condemnation, Seraphis and Ryker stood hand in hand, watching their daughter toddle across the polished floors. Alicia's laughter echoed, bright and unburdened, carrying a promise of a galaxy no longer confined by the old boundaries. A galaxy where difference was not a wall but a doorway to discovery. Seraphis smiled as she leaned against Ryker's shoulder, her emerald skin warm against his. "Did you ever think," she murmured, "that we would come to this?" He chuckled softly. "Never. I never thought I'd find a home in these halls, or a family that spans more than one world." They shared a silent look, the understanding that their bond, and the child they brought into this world, had altered the course of galactic civilization. Yet there was no regret, only gratitude, for the wonders they had unveiled, for the hearts they had helped change, and for the future that lay open and boundless. Outside, the planet's rings glimmered like cosmic jewels. Within the city, lights twinkled in distant spires, each representing countless lives. And among the stars, new stories were already unfolding, on worlds that had once stood apart, now drawn together by the promise of evolution, cooperation, and hope. When the Council's official record-keeper inquired, in a grand ceremony, how they should inscribe this epic-making chapter of history, Seraphis chose her words with care. "Let it be written that life's tapestry is forever weaving new patterns, that in the darkest shadows of fear, a spark of connection can guide us into the unknown, and that no matter our form, our heritage, or our birth, we share in the grand, immeasurable wonder of existence. Today, we begin anew, together." The crowning applause of delegates and citizens alike sealed the council chamber in a sense of triumph. High above, stardust drifted through the endless cosmic sea, bearing silent witness to the day that fear bowed before compassion, and a child of two worlds shone as a beacon of promise. And in that radiant moment, with their daughter nestled safely in their arms, Commander Ryker Voss and Counselor Seraphis, once divided by politics and species, looked out across the assembled throng. United by love, their smiles reflected the sunrise of an era that they, against all odds, had helped bring into being. The galaxy moved forward with them, at peace, venturing into a future bright with infinite possibility.